again. Here I am to talk about another aspect of beer history. This time it's going to be IPA. And the question is, what was 19th century IPA like? Um, which is probably not what most people think. So let's start off with what people think IPA was nowadays, which was a strong beer, a heavily hopped beer, um, and one which was very heavily dry hopped and exported to India. And so, yeah, took a while to get there and underwent some aging processes on the way. Yeah, not really what it was like. I'll start off with the strengths. Um, there's some great analyses from the 1840s from Scottish Ale Brewer by Roberts, and there it gives analyses of IPAs which were both sent to India and consumed domestically in the UK. And these are from the 1840s. And some of the beers exported to India are surprisingly weak, only like 1055, so 5.5, 6% ABV, which, yeah, is pretty weak for a beer that was being exported a long distance. And yeah, and you also have to look, say, okay, so what were beers generally like in that period? I'm talking about the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. And you're looking at London mild ales starting off at 7% ABV and going up to 10.5, 11%. So an IPA of just 5.5, 6% doesn't look particularly strong in that context, for the reason that it wasn't particularly strong. And that's not what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to export a strong beer to India. They're trying to export something that was drinkable and reasonably light. Um, and so yeah, they didn't want to export something really thick and heavy. They wanted to export a lighter beer. And it was only because of the way that the system of getting tax back worked that they generally had them over 1055, 1060, because there had to be a certain gravity to actually get the tax back when you exported it. So that was something that made them brew them stronger than they might have done otherwise. Um, Heavy hopping, yes, they were very heavily hopped. I mean, ridiculously heavily hopped. And British beers were heavily hopped back in the 19th century, and IPAs are really crazily heavily hopped and also heavily dry hopped. So that's parts true. One of the other big things about them that was really important was the very high degree of attenuation. If you look at analyses of bottled Bass Pale Ale from the 1890s, I mean, it's got a starting gravity of 1065 and finishes at 1002. So it's a very high degree of attenuation, especially for the 19th century. And how were they achieving that? Well, it's fairly obvious, really. It was with Brettanomyces. So this was one of the really important things about IPA. One of the things that protected it in the journey was an extremely high degree of attenuation, which was affected by a long secondary Brettanomyces fermentation. So you might think, oh, they brew the beer and then they stick it on the boat and it aged 6 months while it was going there. Well, no, if you see what Bass did, they'd rack the beer into hogsheads after primary fermentation, and then they just stack it up in the brewery yard and leave it there for 11 months in the case of the export beer, 6 months or 6 to 9 months in the case of the beer intended for the UK market. So by the time it had gone through that, not only had it toughened up because it had been exposed to lots of temperature changes and stuff, it had also fermented all the way out. And so when it was put onto the boat, there was nothing for any nasty infection to eat on anymore because the Brettanomyces had eaten everything up. And so that was one of the main forms of protection, heavy hopping, no food left for anything nasty. And this was very important in the way that IPA was brewed. Modern IPA is completely different. People want it as fresh as possible to keep the fresh hop character. That's not how it was drunk in the old days. If you want to get an impression of a 19th century British IPA, then the only beer you can go to nowadays is Orval, which is because of the lots of Goldings hops and Brettanomyces secondary fermentation, it has some of the characteristics, or most of the characteristics, of a 19th century IPA. And I think that's what Orval was when they first brewed it, I think in the 20s. It looks like it was trying to imitate the Bass Pale Ale of the time. Because I've seen an analysis of Bass Pale Ale from the 1930s where they found Brettanomyces in it, which is exactly what you would expect because it was a stock pale ale that was still undergoing a long secondary fermentation with Brettanomyces, unlike most pale ales that would have been sold on the UK market, which would be what you would call running beers. So very, yeah, so no age, no age character at all, sold very quickly after racking. And that's how British pale ales changed. Up until 1840s, 1850s, they were always stock beers. So that is, they're always aged. And it's only when you have the advent of light bitters like AK in the middle of the 19th century that you have what we call running pale ales. So pale ales which were lower in gravity. I mean, a typical AK is about 1045, 1050, so about 4.5%, 5% ABV, which was weaker than the milds of the period, and was sold very young, so it was didn't undergo any aging. Still fairly heavily hopped, but nothing like the insane hopping of IPA. Um, yeah, so I hope that explains a little bit about what IPA was really like in the 19th century. Um, and maybe some brave person might try brewing one again, like Goose Highland did with me with Brewery Yard. Anyway, I'm sure I'll be back with some more of these things in the near future. So if you have any suggestions, stick it in the comments and I'll try and do a little talk about it. Okay, bye bye.